They say you don't just get lost in the Galleria Sombracasta, you get unwritten. That's the whisper that clings to the saltwater taffy air of this town, a chilling little rhyme mothers use to keep children from wandering too close to its boarded-up entrances. I should know. My sister Katie, she wasn't just lost in here, she was erased. A bright, giggling paragraph torn from the story of our lives, leaving behind only a ragged, gaping hole where her laughter used to be. And now, years later, here I am, Arthur Thorne, walking its hollowed-out halls, a ghost haunting the tomb of my own hope, with a ring of keys in my pocket and a rulebook that feels heavier than any stone. The job advertisement was an oddity, tucked away in the classifieds like a forgotten secret. Resident guardian sought for private commercial property. Discretion and adherence to strict protocols essential. Solitude guaranteed. No mention of the Galleria's notorious reputation, no hint of the oppressive silence that now presses in on me from every darkened storefront. Mr. Robert Langley, the man who interviewed me in a dimly lit, dust-sheeted office that smelled of old paper and something vaguely chemical, was an enigma himself. His eyes, pale and unblinking, seemed to look right through me, assessing not my qualifications, but the depth of the shadows I carried. He barely glanced at my resume, more interested in my quiet desperation. He handed me the Resident Guardian's Manual with a thin, almost predatory smile. It was a stained, leather-bound book, its pages brittle and filled with spidery, handwritten rules, some crossed out, others annotated in different, increasingly frantic scripts. "The Galleria has peculiarities, Mr. Thorne," Langley had said, his voice a dry rustle. "These protocols are not suggestions. They are your lifeline. Deviate, and the consequences are permanent." He didn't elaborate, and the chilling finality in his tone forbade any questions. The pay was surprisingly good, enough to keep the wolves from the door. But that wasn't the real reason I took the job. The truth, the one I kept locked away even from myself, was that I needed to be here, in this monument to Katie's absence. The Galleria Sombracasta sprawls like a beached leviathan, its once gleaming facade now a canvas of graffiti and decay. Inside, it's a mausoleum of forgotten commerce. Dust motes dance in the slivers of moonlight that penetrate the grimy skylights, illuminating ghostly mannequins in shattered display windows, their painted smiles chipped and unnerving. The air is thick with the scent of stale popcorn, cheap perfume, and an undercurrent of something else, something ancient and metallic, like old blood or rusted machinery. My footsteps echo unnaturally loud on the cracked tiles, each one a trespass in this cathedral of silence. It's a silence that listens, that waits. My duties are simple on paper: patrol the designated sectors, report any structural damage or unauthorized entry, and, above all, follow the manual. The manual itself is a character in this unfolding drama. Rule 1. Always wear the Resident Guardian identification badge visibly. If the name hologram flickers or displays another name, proceed immediately to the Clock Tower Sanctuary and report to Mr. Langley via shortwave radio. I'd checked my badge 100 times already. Arthur Thorne glowed steadily in faint blue. For now. The rules are a litany of bizarre injunctions, each one hinting at a lurking, unseen wrongness. Rule 4. Mannequins in the former Magnolia's department store, West Sector, Level 2, must have their faces turned to the wall between 0100 and 0400. If any are found facing the corridor, do not make eye contact. Circumvent and continue your route. Note in the shift log. Why? What happens if I look? The manual offers no explanations, only directives, and the imagined answers are always worse. I trace the faded gold lettering of a defunct candy store, sweet nothings, and a cold dread settles in my stomach. Katie loved candy stores. Every shadow seems to whisper her name. My small living quarters are in what used to be the mall's security office, a cramped, windowless room retrofitted with a cot, a hot plate, and the aforementioned shortwave radio. It's a sterile, lonely existence, punctuated only by the crackle of static and the hum of the emergency lights. Mr. Langley communicates exclusively through the radio, his voice a disembodied instruction, always calm, always slightly detached. He never asks about my well-being, only about my adherence to protocol. It feels less like a job and more like a vigil, or perhaps an offering. The weight of the Galleria presses down, a palpable presence. It's not just the physical structure, it's the accumulated weight of a million forgotten moments, a million unfulfilled desires, a million goodbyes said or unsaid within these walls. Katie's goodbye was never said. She just faded from a family picnic near the now condemned fountain in the central atrium. One moment there, the next, just an empty space where the sunlight hit the ground. The police found nothing, no trace, as if the mall itself had inhaled her. And so I walk these echoing corridors, a custodian of sorrow, bound by rules I don't understand, in a place that feels like it's slowly unmaking itself, or perhaps unmaking me. The manual is my only guide, my only shield against what? The question hangs in the stale air, unanswered, but I feel it in the prickle on my skin, in the way the shadows seem to lengthen when I'm not looking. What exactly am I guarding this place from? Or, more terrifyingly, what are these rules keeping from me? The first few nights were a blur of uneasy routine, a meticulous dance choreographed by the manual's strange demands. I learned the Galleria's groans and sighs, the way the wind whistled through broken panes in the food court, the scuttling of unseen things that were probably just rats. I told myself they were just rats. Covering the Magnolia's mannequins became a dreaded ritual, their blank plaster eyes seeming to follow me even when averted. The silence, usually a heavy blanket, sometimes felt thin, stretched taut, as if holding back a scream. I diligently logged every minor anomaly, every flicker of a faulty light, every draft from an unknown source. Then came the third night, a Tuesday. The air was unusually cold, the kind of damp chill that seeps into your bones and refuses to leave. I was in the west sector, level 2, approaching Magnolia's, the beam of my flashlight cutting a nervous swathe through the gloom. The mannequins, a silent congregation of outdated fashion, stood in their designated positions, faces dutifully turned to the crumbling drywall. I began my work, my breath misting, the only sound the soft scuff of my boots and the rustle of the cheap dust covers I was supposed to drape over them. Another unwritten addendum Langley had given me over the radio: reduces resonance. I was halfway through the display, reaching for a particularly tall, slender mannequin in a faded wedding dress, when I heard it. A whisper, soft as a cobweb brushing my ear. Artie? My blood turned to ice. Artie. Only one person had ever called me Artie. Katie. It was her voice, unmistakably her voice. Younger, yes. The way she sounded before. It seemed to emanate from the deepest shadows at the back of the sprawling, ransacked store, a place my flashlight beam couldn't quite penetrate, a darkness that felt absolute. My heart hammered against my ribs, a frantic bird trapped in a cage. I froze, hand outstretched, the dust cover slipping from my numb fingers. "Katie?" I breathed, my own voice a raw, broken thing. The silence that followed was more terrifying than the whisper. It was a waiting silence, an expectant silence. My training, the ingrained terror of Langley's warnings, screamed at me to turn, to run, to follow protocol. But this was Katie, or the echo of her. How could I not answer? How could I not try to pierce that beckoning darkness? Then, a faint blue light pulsed at the periphery of my vision. My badge. I fumbled for it, yanking it from my shirt. The holographic display, Arthur Thorne, was flickering erratically. And then, for a heart-stopping second, the letters reformed, shimmering, unstable, into a new word, Katie. My breath hitched. Rule 1 slammed into my consciousness. If the name hologram flickers or displays another name, proceed immediately to the clock tower sanctuary. This wasn't just a sound. This was the Galleria itself, a direct violation of its own established parameters of unreality. The whisper came again, a little stronger this time, laced with an almost childlike impatience. "Artie, come find me." It wasn't just in the air, it felt like it was inside my head, a direct line to the rawest, most vulnerable part of my grief. The badge pulsed again. Katie, Arthur, Katie, a frantic, silent argument. The darkness in Magnolia's seemed to deepen, to breathe, to promise answers I'd sold my soul to hear. The rulebook felt like a lead weight in my pocket, its dictates suddenly flimsy, irrelevant, in the face of this impossible, devastating hope. I took a step towards the back of the store, towards the voice, towards the name on my badge. My flashlight trembled, casting dancing, distorted shadows that made the other mannequins seem to lean in, their blank faces somehow knowing, somehow anticipatory. The air grew colder still, and a faint, cloyingly sweet smell, like overripe flowers, drifted from the darkness. It was the perfume Katie had loved, the one she'd saved her pocket money for weeks to buy, a cheap, synthetic jasmine. Another pulse from the badge, Arthur, this time more insistent, almost a warning. The rational part of my brain, the part that had memorized every bizarre rule, was screaming. But the part of me that was still a grieving older brother, the part that had never stopped searching, was a roaring inferno. The rules were there to keep me from vanishing, Langley had implied. But what if vanishing was the only way to find what was already gone? What if the Galleria wasn't just taking, but also keeping? The silence stretched, a fragile skin over an abyss. The beckoning darkness, the memory of Katie's voice, the impossible name on my badge. It was a perfect storm of broken rules and shattered hope. I stood there, caught between the cold logic of survival and the burning, irrational need to answer a ghost. And in that moment, I knew this job was more than just a strange way to earn a living. It was a descent, and I had only just stepped off the edge. The encounter in Magnolia's left an indelible scar on my nights. The flickering badge had eventually settled back to Arthur Thorne, but the echo of Katie resonated deep within me, a discordant note in the symphony of my grief. I reported the incident to Mr. Langley via the shortwave, my voice carefully devoid of the terror and desperate hope that clawed at my insides. Vocal anomaly and badge malfunction, West Sector, Level 2, 0217 hours, I recited. Langley's response was, as always, clipped and unnervingly calm. Noted, Mr. Thorne. Adherence to protocol is paramount. Increase vigilance. Avoid Sector W2 parallax zones for the next 3 rotations. Parallax zones? The manual offered no such terminology. The Galleria, however, seemed to take my near transgression as an invitation. The anomalies, once subtle and sporadic, began to escalate with a chilling, almost playful intelligence. The previously silent food court, a vast echoing cavern of faded fast food logos and overturned tables, started to bleed sound. One night, as I passed its barricaded entrance, Rule 19, food court access strictly prohibited between 2300 and 0500, regardless of auditory phenomena, a faint melody drifted out, a lullaby. Not just any lullaby, but the one my mother used to sing to Katie and me, a tune so deeply buried in my memory I'd thought it lost forever. My hand went to the rusted metal gate, a desperate urge to... The customers became more frequent, more insistent. Previously, they were fleeting, peripheral shimmers, easily dismissed as tricks of the light. Now, they lingered. I'd turn a corner in the deserted Grand Concourse and see a figure standing by a boarded-up jewelry store. A woman in a dated dress, perhaps, or a man in a too-large suit. Their features always indistinct, their forms slightly translucent. Rule 11. Ignore any customers cited after official closing hours, permanently closed. They are not real. If one attempts to speak or call your name, respond with, "The Galleria is closed. Please retire," and walk away without looking back. If they persist, proceed to the sanctuary. One night, a young boy, no older than Katie was when she vanished, stepped directly into my flashlight beam near the old carousel. He just stared, his eyes dark pools. "Are you lost?" he'd asked, his voice flat, devoid of inflection. "The Galleria is closed," I choked out, my heart seizing. "Please, retire." He didn't move. He just smiled, a slow, empty stretching of lips, before dissolving like smoke. Objects began to appear with unsettling regularity, violating Rule 15. If you find an object that clearly does not belong to the abandoned mall, a new toy, fresh food, a recently written note, do not touch it. Mark its location on the anomaly map and inform Mr. Langley. He will instruct on disposal. A bright red toy car, identical to one Katie had cherished, materialized on the grimy steps of the main escalator. A single perfect rose lay on the counter of the derelict florist, its petals dewy as if freshly cut. Once, I found a child's drawing, rendered in crayon on crisp, new paper, depicting a stick figure family holding hands under a distorted, leering sun. My family, our faces crudely but recognizably drawn, with a small, smudged figure missing. Each discovery was a fresh stab of pain, a deliberate, cruel twisting of the knife of memory. My own reflection became a source of quiet horror. Rule 22. If you see your own reflection in a dark shop window and it is doing something you are not, waving, smiling strangely, break eye contact and recite the Guardian's Creed, page 3 of the manual, 3 times. Do not return to that area for the remainder of the shift. It happened near the old bookstore. I glanced at my distorted image in the darkened glass, and my reflection winked. A slow, conspiratorial wink. My blood ran cold. I recited the creed. I am the watcher in the quiet, the keeper of the forgotten, the line against the fade. But the words felt hollow, a child's charm against an encroaching cosmic darkness. The psychological toll was immense. Sleep became a landscape of echoing corridors and Katie's whispered name. My waking hours were a tightrope walk between the rigid structure of the rules and the encroaching chaos of the Galleria's manifestations. I started talking to myself, narrating my patrols, just to hear a sane voice. Doubt became my constant companion. Was I truly seeing these things? Or was the isolation, the grief, the sheer oppressive wrongness of this place finally fracturing my mind? Langley's terse radio confirmations offered no reassurance, only an indifferent acknowledgement of my descent. I became obsessed with the shift log, poring over my own entries and the sparse, cautious notes of my predecessors, if any truly existed beyond the scrawls in the manual. Were they experiencing this too? Or was the Galleria tailoring its torments specifically for me, using Katie as its key? The thought was unbearable. The feeling of being watched was constant, not by human eyes, but by the building itself, by its very bricks and mortar, by the collective memory imprinted on its decaying structure. It was a vast, sentient trap, and I was the bait, or perhaps the slowly digesting meal. The weight of the unspoken pressed down on me. The insidious erosion of my own memories began subtly, a stray thought that wouldn't quite cohere, a name that danced just out of reach. At first, I dismissed it as fatigue, the natural consequence of perpetual twilight and heightened stress. But then came the morning I couldn't recall my childhood best friend's surname. It was there, on the tip of my tongue, a familiar shape, but the word itself had been plucked. A cold dread, sharper than any I'd felt from the apparitions, gripped me. This was Rule 33 in action. If you begin to forget details of your own past, names of friends, where you grew up, proceed to the sanctuary and consult the Personal Reference Archive, provided at contract inception. Read aloud until memories stabilize. The sanctuary of the clock tower was my only haven, a small circular room at the apex of the Galleria's central tower, accessible only by a rickety service lift. It was stark, utilitarian, containing the shortwave radio, a hard chair, a secure locker, and very little else. The Personal Reference Archive was a slim, nondescript binder Langley had handed me on my first day, filled with photocopied documents, my birth certificate, old school reports, a few faded photographs of my parents, and a single, heartbreakingly clear school picture of Katie, her smile wide and gap-toothed. I had barely glanced at it then, too raw from the fresh wound of her memory. With trembling hands, I opened the binder. My own life, condensed into a few sterile pages. I read my name aloud, Arthur Michael Thorne. I read my date of birth, my parents' names, the address of the house where Katie and I had built forts in the backyard. The words felt foreign, like lines from a play I was struggling to remember. The more I read, the more I realized how much had become fuzzy, hazy, as if a fog was rolling in, obscuring the landscape of my past. The panic was a living thing, coiling in my gut. This place wasn't just showing me ghosts, it was actively stealing me from myself. It was then, as I frantically flipped through the binder, desperate to anchor myself to some concrete fact, that I found it. Tucked between a copy of my high school diploma and an old utility bill was a sheaf of loose pages, handwritten on cheap, lined paper, the ink faded and water-stained in places. The handwriting was cramped, agitated, nothing like Langley's precise script or the varied hands in the manual. At the top of the first page, scrawled with desperate intensity, was a name: Thomas Grady, Night watch, log entry, unofficial. My heart leaped. A predecessor, someone else who had walked these haunted halls. Grady's entries were fragmented, a descent into paranoia and terror that mirrored my own, but amplified, accelerated. He wrote of memory thieves and hollow-eyed children who whisper your secrets. He described the music from the food court changing to his wife's favorite song, the mannequins rearranging themselves into tableaus of his deepest fears. Then came the entry that made me stop breathing. The Galleria doesn't just take, it consumes. It feeds on what we were, on who we loved. It's a stomach, digesting souls. The rules? They're just the salt and pepper, making us more palatable. Or, just maybe, they slow the bleeding. He wrote about his daughter, my Ilara. I see her in the glass, always just out of reach. The cinema knows her name. The cinema. Rule 28. The old cinema on level 3 is a forbidden zone. If the marquee lights illuminate, spelling a name you know, activate protocol Iron Curtain. Do not approach. Grady had clearly approached. His later entries became almost incoherent, filled with desperate pleas and disconnected phrases. She's not gone, just folded in. The pattern, I can almost see the pattern. The final entry was barely legible, a shaky scrawl that trailed off the page. It wants an anchor, something to hold it to. Us, Ilara, the forgetting. It's so cold in here. I can't remember her laugh anymore. The rules weren't just arbitrary safeguards. They were a complex, perhaps failing, system designed to combat this cognitive decay, this spiritual entropy. And I, like Grady before me, was not just a guardian of a building, but a guard against my own dissolution. The stakes were infinitely higher than I had imagined. This wasn't about protecting property. It was about protecting the very essence of who I was, who Katie had been. The Galleria Sombracosta was a predator, and its preferred prey was memory itself. The knowledge was a cold, heavy stone in my chest. Langley knew. He had to know. He'd given me the personal reference archive, after all. Was he trying to help in his own detached way? Or was he simply cataloging another specimen before its inevitable decay? The anomalia were not random. They were targeted, personalized, designed to pry open the cracks in one's psyche, to lure you towards the forgetting. And Katie was the biggest crack in mine. The Galleria knew that. It had known from the moment I signed that damnable contract. The discovery of Thomas Grady's unofficial log ignited a furious, desperate energy within me. The fear was still there, a constant, gnawing companion, but now it was mixed with a bitter anger and a grim resolve. Langley. He was the gatekeeper, the one who held the keys to this labyrinth of sorrow, and he had knowingly sent me into its depths, armed with half-truths and a rule-book that felt more like a set of instructions for my own slow vivisection. The carefully constructed wall of detached professionalism I'd maintained in our radio communications crumbled. I needed answers, not just for myself, but for Grady, for his lost Ilara, and for the ghost of Katie that this place so cruelly dangled before me. That evening, during my scheduled check-in, I didn't wait for Langley's customary "Status report, Mr. Thorne." I seized the microphone, my voice tight with suppressed fury. "Langley, we need to talk about Thomas Grady." The silence on the other end stretched, taut, and heavy. A silence I now recognized as Langley's method of asserting control, of letting the unspoken anxieties fester. When he finally spoke, his voice was even drier, more devoid of inflection than usual. "Mr. Grady is no longer in our employ, Mr. Thorne. His tenure concluded some time ago. His records are sealed, as per protocol." "Sealed or erased?" I shot back, the words tasting like acid. "I found his notes, Langley, in the archive you so thoughtfully provided. He wrote about this place consuming memories, about it unwriting people. He wrote about his daughter, Ilara. What happened to them, Langley? What are you not telling me?" Another pause, longer this time. I could almost picture him in that dusty office, his pale eyes unblinking, a faint reptilian smile playing on his lips. "Mr. Thorne, your remit is to observe, report, and adhere. Speculation regarding former personnel is unproductive and potentially destabilizing to your own assignment." The veiled threat was unmistakable. Destabilizing? As if my sanity wasn't already hanging by a thread, frayed by the whispers in the shadows and the constant predatory hunger of this maul. "Is that what happened to Grady?" I pressed, my knuckles white on the microphone. "Did he become unproductive? Did he destabilize too much for your liking?" Langley's voice, when it returned, had a new edge, a sliver of something cold and sharp beneath the usual monotone. "Curiosity, Mr. Thorne, can be a dangerous path in a place like the Galleria. Some doors are best left unopened, lest the draught extinguish the candle you hold. Focus on your duties. The manual is your guide." His evasiveness, his condescending warnings, only fueled my suspicion and my resolve. If Finch wouldn't give me answers, I would find them myself. The carefully cultivated obedience I had clung to for survival began to fray. I started to test the boundaries, small rebellions at first. I'd linger a moment too long near a flickering light, deliberately fail to report a minor auditory anomaly, or forget to turn one of the... The conflict was no longer just between me and the mall. It was within me. Part of me screamed for self-preservation, to retreat into the rigid safety of the rules, to become the unthinking automaton Langley seemed to prefer. But another, fiercer part, awakened by Grady's desperate words and fueled by Katie's memory, urged me to fight back, to understand, to reclaim some agency in this waking nightmare. The hope of finding something, anything, related to Katie, however faint, was a powerful, dangerous intoxicant. Was she truly folded in, as Grady had written? A part of this place's horrific tapestry? The thought was both monstrous and, in a twisted way, a lifeline. My dreams became battlegrounds. Katie would be there, beckoning from a darkened storefront, and just as I reached for her, Langley's face would superimpose itself, his eyes cold, his lips forming the words of a forgotten rule. I started to document my own unofficial log, scribbling notes on spare scraps of paper, hiding them in different locations throughout my patrol route, a desperate attempt to preserve my own narrative before the Galleria or Langley could edit it beyond recognition. I felt like a spy in my own life, every action weighed, every observation scrutinized for its potential threat or its hidden meaning. The Galleria itself seemed to sense this internal schism. Its manifestations became more pointed, more personal. It wasn't just random nostalgic tunes anymore. It was the specific, off-key way Katie used to hum her favorite pop song. It wasn't just generic shadowy figures. It was a silhouette that, for a fleeting moment, looked uncannily like my father, turning away just as I called out. The place was learning, adapting, using my own heart against me. And Mr. Robert Langley, my faceless, voiceless tormentor over the radio, felt less like a supervisor and more like the mall's dispassionate, calculating consciousness, subtly guiding me towards a predetermined, horrifying end. The rules were his scalpel, and my memories were the flesh he was meticulously dissecting. The unspoken war between my burgeoning defiance and the Galleria's insidious influence was heading towards an inevitable flashpoint. Langley's warnings about the cinema on Level 3, Rule 28's stark prohibition, echoed in my mind. But Thomas Grady's tormented scribblings about his daughter Ilara and the cinema's marquee had planted a dangerous seed. "The cinema knows her name," he'd written. If it knew Ilara's, did it also know Katie's? The thought was a siren song, pulling me towards the forbidden zone with an almost irresistible force, despite every instinct screaming caution. My grief, my desperate need for any semblance of an answer, was overriding the ingrained fear of the manual. One particularly oppressive night, when the silence of the Galleria felt charged, almost vibrating, it happened. As I patrolled the periphery of Level 3, my flashlight beam deliberately avoiding the sealed double doors of the Cineplex Royale, the ancient marquee above it flickered. Dust rained down as, one by one, ancient bulbs sputtered to life, their sickly yellow glow forming letters against the grimy facade. Katie! My breath caught in my throat. Then more letters, T-H-O-R-N. And finally, with agonizing slowness, I is waiting. My heart felt like it was trying to batter its way out of my chest. This wasn't a subtle whisper or a fleeting glimpse. This was a direct, undeniable invitation. Protocol screamed Iron Curtain, a complex procedure involving emergency power shutdowns and sealing off the entire level, something I wasn't even sure I could execute alone. But Grady's ghost and Katie's were louder. Langley's threats, the manual's cold dictates, they all faded into insignificance against that luminous, impossible message. I found a rusted pry bar near a maintenance closet, the decision already made, my actions moving with a momentum of their own. The seals on the Cineplex doors were old, corroded. They groaned in protest. The air that billowed out from within was stale, thick with the scent of decayed velvet, phantom popcorn, and something else, an undercurrent of that same cloyingly sweet jasmine perfume Katie had adored. My flashlight cut through the oppressive darkness, revealing rows of tattered seats, a collapsed concession stand, and a screen that seemed to absorb all light, a perfect, impenetrable black. Then the true horror began. The space around me started to shift. The dimensions of the cinema warped, stretched. The far wall dissolved, and in its place, impossibly, was the food court from Level 1, not as it was now, derelict and silent, but as it might have been in its heyday, bustling with light and movement. But the customers, milling about, were grotesquely wrong. Their faces were smudged, their movements jerky, like poorly animated puppets. I recognized some of them, a distorted echo of my third-grade teacher, a nightmarish caricature of our old mailman, all of them turning their vacant, hollow eyes towards me. They weren't speaking, but a cacophony of overlapping whispers filled the air. Fragments of conversations I'd had, lines from Katie's favorite cartoons, my mother's worried admonitions. It was a personalized hell, woven from the fabric of my own life. My memories were being weaponized, turned into a horrifying living diorama. Then, from behind the spectral concession stand, a figure emerged, small, slender, wearing a pale dress that shimmered in the unnatural light. My flashlight beam found its face. It was a mannequin, its plaster features crudely molded into a horrifying approximation of Katie's. It moved with an unnatural, gliding grace, its painted eyes fixed on me. "Artie," it lisped, the voice a distorted recording of my sister's. "You came. I knew you'd come." It reached out a stiff, plastic hand. I felt a terrifying suction, a pulling sensation, not on my body, but on my mind, as if my very thoughts, my memories were being drawn out of me, siphoned towards this monstrous effigy. I stumbled back, crying out, the pry bar clattering to the floor. The names of my parents, the street I grew up on, Katie's favorite color, they were all becoming slippery, indistinct. I was fading. The sensation was indescribable, a cold, hollowing emptiness spreading from within. The Guardian's Creed, the words I'd recited countless times, surfaced from some deep instinctual well of self-preservation. "I am the Watcher in the quiet," I gasped, the words a lifeline. The Katie mannequin recoiled slightly, its smile faltering. "The Keeper of the Forgotten." The food court illusion flickered, the faces of the spectral customers momentarily losing focus. "The Line Against the Fade." With the last word, I turned and fled, scrambling out of the cinema, out of that personalized abyss, the sound of the Katie mannequin's distorted, sorrowful cry echoing behind me. The marquee outside now read, "You can't save her." The illusion of safety, the fragile bulwark of the rules, had been utterly shattered. The Galleria wasn't just a passive recipient of my memories. It was an active, malevolent intelligence, capable of crafting nightmares from my deepest loves and fears. And it knew, with horrifying certainty, exactly where to strike. My desperate search for Katie had led me directly into the heart of its hunger. I stumbled back to the clock tower sanctuary, my body trembling, my mind a maelstrom of terror and fractured memories. The brief, desperate recitation of the Guardian's Creed had bought me moments, a temporary reprieve from the cognitive unraveling, but the tendrils of the Galleria's influence still clung to me, cold and insidious. The sanctuary, my only supposed safe haven, felt tainted, its familiar starkness now imbued with a new layer of dread. I had to report this, had to tell Langley the full extent of the cinema's horrors, the personalized nature of its attack. Protocol, even now, was a drowning man's reflex. But the shortwave radio was dead. Not just static-filled, but utterly lifeless, its power indicator dark. A fresh wave of panic washed over me. This was my only link to Langley, to any semblance of an outside world. I checked the breakers, the ancient wiring, anything, but it was no use. The silence in the sanctuary was suddenly more oppressive than the silence of the mall itself. I was truly, utterly alone. Or so I thought. A soft creak behind me made me spin around, my heart leaping into my throat. Mr. Robert Langley stood in the doorway. Not his disembodied voice over the radio, but Langley in the flesh. A rare and, until now, unwelcome sight. But something was terribly wrong. He looked incomplete. His features seemed to shimmer at the edges, like a heat haze on asphalt. His usual immaculate, if dated, suit appeared ill-fitting, as if draped on a frame that wasn't quite solid. His pale eyes, usually so unnervingly focused, were cloudy, distant. He carried the faint metallic scent I associated with the deeper, older parts of the mall. "Mr. Thorne," he said, his voice lacking its usual dry precision, now imbued with a strange, resonant quality, like multiple voices speaking in unison, just out of sync. You have deviated significantly from established parameters. Your emotionality is causing considerable instability within the matrix. Matrix? What was he talking about? This wasn't Langley, not the Langley I knew, however unsettling he had been. This was something else, something wearing his skin like a poorly tailored costume. What are you?" I stammered, backing away until my shoulders hit the cold stone of the tower wall. The thing, wearing Langley's face, tilted its head, a slow, unnatural movement. "I am the interface," it replied, the oral shimmer in its voice intensifying. "A necessary mediation between the core consciousness of this place and subsequent acquisitions, like yourself, and Robert Langley, the original custodian, whose pattern I currently inhabit." My mind reeled. The original custodian? So the real Langley was gone? Absorbed? Unwritten? Just like Grady? Just like they intended for me? "The rules," I managed. "What are they for? If you're—" The interface Langley offered a semblance of its former thin smile, but it was a horrifying parody, stretched too wide, devoid of any human warmth. "The protocols, Mr. Thorne, serve a dual purpose. They are a framework to acclimate new acquisitions, to gentle the transition, and they are a means of assessing resonance. Your connection to the one you call Katie is remarkably potent, a prime candidate for deep integration. Or, perhaps, its cloudy eyes seem to sharpen fractionally. The core finds your particular pattern of grief and resilience compelling." My blood ran cold. An anchor point? Integration? I was not a guardian. I was a resource, a potential component in whatever monstrous decaying machine the Galleria Sombricasta had become. The manual, the radio calls, Langley's detached instructions, it had all been a charade, a carefully managed process of indoctrination and evaluation. The illusion of a system, of order, of a job with rules, had shattered completely, leaving only the raw, terrifying truth of my predicament. I was a fly caught in a vast, sentient web, and the spider was finally showing its face. "Katie," I whispered, the name a prayer and a curse. "Is she here? Is she an anchor too?" The interface Langley's form flickered more violently, its features momentarily blurring into a swirl of indistinct light and shadow before reasserting its borrowed facade. "The Katie pattern is integral, woven deep, a foundational memory thread. To disturb it would be to unravel much. You were chosen, Mr. Thorne, because you resonate with that thread. You are a key to refreshing its signal." It was talking about my sister as if she were a piece of code. The sanctuary, once a symbol of minimal safety, now felt like the very heart of the trap. The radio was dead because the interface no longer needed the pretense of distance. It was here, with me, its intentions laid bare, however cryptically. My role had been reconfigured. I was no longer an observer. I was a target, a crucial component in the Galleria's ongoing, parasitic existence. The system hadn't just collapsed, it had revealed itself to be a monstrous, predatory intelligence, wearing the mask of mundane bureaucracy. And I was its next meal, or perhaps its next unwilling caretaker. The interface Langley's revelations left me reeling, adrift in a sea of horrifying new realities. My grief for Katie, my desperate search, had been a beacon drawing this thing towards me. marking me as a prime candidate for its grotesque purposes. As the entity before me continued its disconcerting shimmer, its voice a layered, inhuman drone, my mind raced, scrabbling for an escape, a weapon, anything. The rules were a lie. Langley was a puppet, the sanctuary a cage. My gaze fell upon the Resident Guardian's manual, lying discarded on the small table where I'd left it after my futile attempt to radio out. It seemed so pathetic now, so utterly useless. Yet, as I stared at its stained leather cover, a faint memory surfaced. Thomas Grady's log. He'd mentioned the manual, but also alluded to older records, the true charts, he'd called them, before his writing dissolved into madness. Driven by a desperate, irrational hunch, I lunged for the manual. The interface Langley made a soft, dismissive sound, a clicking in its borrowed throat, as if my actions were a predictable, futile twitch of a snared animal. It didn't try to stop me. Perhaps it believed I was already too far gone, too mired in its cognitive web. The manual felt different in my hands now, not a tool of my oppressor, but a relic, a testament to others who had faced this. I ran my fingers over its worn spine, its buckled cover, and then I felt it, a slight irregularity, a subtle thickness at the back near the binding. It wasn't damage, it was a seam. With trembling fingers I picked at it, my nails finding purchase. The leather gave way, revealing a shallow, cleverly concealed pocket. My heart hammered. This was something Langley, or the interface, hadn't known about, or had overlooked. Inside, wrapped in a piece of oilskin, was a small, much older journal. Its pages an almost translucent vellum, covered in an elegant, archaic script. And, nestled beside it, a small, tarnished silver locket, intricately carved with a forget-me-not flower. As my fingers brushed the locket, a jolt, like static electricity but deeper, more resonant, shot up my arm. A forgotten memory exploded in my mind with blinding clarity. Katie, age 7, her eyes wide with delight as our grandmother fastened this very locket around her neck. "So you'll never forget us, little bird," Grandma had whispered. Katie had lost it, here, in the Galleria, the day she vanished. I'd forgotten. The mall had made me forget this crucial detail. The journal script was difficult to decipher, but the name on the inside cover was clear. Daniel Mitchell, cartographer of faded places, year of our Lord, 1888. My ancestor, the family legends, dismissed as fanciful tales by my pragmatic parents, of a distant relative who mapped strange emptinesses, suddenly roared into focus. Mitchell's journal was not about the Galleria Sombra Costa as a mall, but as a nexus of desiccated realities, a place where the veil between worlds was thin, a wound in the fabric of what is. He described it as a collector of echoes, a repository of sorrows, that had existed in some form long before the concrete and steel of the shopping center. He wrote of anchors of memory, objects imbued with strong emotional resonance that could, if wielded with intent and understanding, temporarily stabilize the nexus or even repel its consuming shadows. He detailed rituals, canticles of stilling, words of power in a language that looked like no earthly tongue. The rules in my modern manual, he theorized, the locket, Katie's locket, an anchor of memory. The interface Langley had spoken of Katie's pattern being integral, a foundational memory thread. This locket was a direct, physical link to that thread, untainted by the Galleria's subsequent manipulations of my own mind. And the journal contained the knowledge of how to use it. A wild, desperate hope, sharper and more potent than any I'd felt before, surged through me. The Regra Zero I'd seen scrawled in the main manual by some unknown hand. Nothing that disappeared in the Galleria Sombra Costa really goes away forever, and nothing that belongs to the Galleria can truly leave, now resonated with terrible, beautiful clarity. Katie wasn't just a consumed memory, she was part of its structure, and this locket was a key. The interface Langley watched me, its head tilted, a flicker of something unreadable in its borrowed eyes. "Curious artifacts," it droned. "Fragments of forgotten methodologies. Ineffective against the core's inevitable processes." But there was a new note in its layered voice, a faint tremor of, was it uncertainty? For the first time since this nightmare began, I felt a sliver of power, a tangible weapon against the encroaching dark. The game had changed. I was no longer just a rat in its maze. I was a thorn, a descendant of a cartographer, and I held an anchor. The interface Langley's dismissive tone regarding Daniel Mitchell's journal and Katie's locket only solidified my resolve. It sensed a threat, however small, in these forgotten methodologies. Its confidence, usually so absolute, now carried that faint, dissonant hum of unease. The core's processes are not inevitable if they can be redirected, I stated, my voice surprisingly steady, the locket clutched tight in my palm, its cool metal a small, solid point of reality in this swirling nightmare. The warmth spreading from it was no longer just a physical sensation. It felt like courage, like Katie's own fierce little spirit rekindled. "Redirection implies understanding, Mr. Thorne," the interface Langley countered, its form subtly rippling, the borrowed features of Robert Langley momentarily losing cohesion. "You grasp at echoes, at superstitions. This place operates on principles far beyond your ancestral scribblings." It took a hesitant step towards me, a movement that was less a physical advance and more a flow of an unseen current. "Your resonance is still valuable. Surrender the artifact. Allow the integration to proceed. It will be less disorienting for you." Its voice was almost a caress now, a silken, venomous persuasion. "No," I said, the word cutting through its hypnotic drone. "I'm not here to be integrated. I'm here for Katie." I glanced at the journal, open on the table, its spidery script detailing the path to what Mitchell called the corazón del olvido, the heart of forgetting, or, as I now understood it, the core. The modern manual, in its sanitized, bureaucratic way, had a rule for it too, a stark warning. Rule 21, Nivel Fundamento, basement level, sector Gamma 7, is strictly off-limits. Access shaft sealed. No attempts at entry are to be made under any circumstances. Breach will result in immediate contract re-evaluation. Contract re-evaluation? A euphemism for erasure, no doubt. "The Nivel Fundamento," I announced, more to myself than to the interface. "That's where the core is, isn't it? That's where Katie's foundational memory thread is strongest." The interface Langley actually recoiled, a visible shudder passing through its shimmering form. "Access is restricted. The energies there are unrefined. You would be unmade before you took 10 steps." Its attempt at a warning sounded hollow, laced with something akin to fear. It didn't want me going there. That was all the confirmation I needed. Clutching the locket and Mitchell's journal, I moved towards the sanctuary door. The interface Langley shifted, attempting to block my path, its form becoming less defined, more like a column of swirling, shadowy mist, with Langley's distorted face floating within. This is inadvisable, Arthur Thorne. The integrity of the Nexus depends on... I remembered the Guardian's creed, the one I'd used in the cinema, the one that had momentarily repelled the manifestations. Mitchell's journal spoke of words of warding, simple phrases that, when spoken with intent by one attuned to an anchor, could disrupt the lesser emanations of the Nexus. The creed, I realized, was a corrupted, diluted version of one such warding. "I am the watcher in the quiet," I began, my voice ringing with a new, unexpected authority, the locket pulsing warmly in my hand. The misty form of the interface flinched, its edges fraying. "The Keeper of the Forgotten," it hissed, a sound like dry leaves skittering across concrete. "The line against the fade." As I uttered the final word, I pushed past it. It tried to coalesce, to grab me, but its shadowy tendrils seemed to pass through me with only a chilling sensation, like brushing against a curtain of icy cobwebs. The journey to Sector Gamma 7 was a gauntlet. The Galleria, now fully alerted to my intent, threw everything it had at me. Whispers clawed at my sanity. Ghostly figures lunged from every darkened doorway. The very architecture seemed to warp and shift, trying to disorient me, to turn me back. But the locket was a beacon, and Mitchell's journal, though I could only snatch glances at its archaic instructions, provided a rudimentary map through the chaos. The rules I had once followed out of fear, I now wielded as weapons. Rule 11's dismissal of customers became a shield. Rule 4's aversion of the mannequin's gaze became a way to navigate their silent, accusing ranks. The access shaft to the Nivel Fundamento was exactly where Mitchell's diagram indicated, hidden behind a collapsed section of a forgotten hardware store. The seal Langley had mentioned, long since corroded into nothingness. A narrow, rusted iron ladder descended into absolute blackness, a maw that reeked of damp earth, ozone, and that same faint metallic scent of the core. The interface, Langley's voice, echoed from the darkness above as I began my descent, no longer persuasive, but filled with a cold, seething rage. "You will unmake us all, Thorne. The echoes will scatter. The forgetting will be absolute." I didn't look back. I was going to the heart, to Katie, whatever the cost. The locket felt like a burning star in my hand. The descent into the Nivel Fundamento was like plunging into a frozen, lightless ocean. The rusted rungs of the ladder groaned under my weight, each one a step further from any semblance of known reality. The air grew impossibly cold, heavy, pressing in on me with a physical weight that made each breath an effort. The metallic scent was overwhelming now, acrid and sharp, a smell that spoke of ancient, primal energies. Daniel Mitchell's journal, tucked inside my jacket, felt like a fragile shield against an encroaching cosmic storm. The locket in my hand, however, pulsed with a steady, defiant warmth, a tiny ember fighting against an infinite night. When my feet finally touched solid ground, it wasn't a floor in any conventional sense. The space around me was wrong, utterly, fundamentally wrong. It was a non-Euclidean nightmare, a swirling vortex of fractured realities, where walls curved into impossible angles, where gravity seemed to ebb and flow like a tide, and where the very air shimmered with captured light and shadow. Fragments of forgotten stores, snippets of conversations from decades past, the ghostly afterimages of countless lives that had brushed against the Galleria's hunger, all swirled around me in a chaotic, mesmerizing dance. It was the raw, unfiltered consciousness of the Nexus, beautiful and terrifying in its alien complexity. And there, at the perceived center of this impossible space, though center felt like an inadequate word, was the core. It wasn't a machine or a creature, but a light a vast, silent, incandescent presence, a pulsing nexus of pure, concentrated memory, of pain, of longing, of oblivion. It throbbed with a slow, rhythmic beat, like a monstrous, ethereal heart, drawing in the fragmented realities around it, weaving them into its incandescent tapestry. Its brilliance was blinding, yet it cast no shadows, only an all-encompassing, pearlescent glow that seemed to strip away the veneer of the world, revealing the raw, quivering nerves of existence. Then I saw her, or the echo of her, suspended within the light of the core, like an insect in amber, was a shimmering, translucent figure. Katie. Not the Katie I remembered, not the laughing, vibrant child, but a crystallized memory, an essence, her form flickering, indistinct, yet achingly familiar. Her eyes were closed, her expression one of profound, unearthly serenity. She was not suffering, not trapped in any conventional sense, but integrated, a part of the light, a part of the core, a foundational thread, just as the interface Langley had said. My heart broke and soared in the same agonizing instant. The interface Langley's voice, or a deeper, more resonant version of it, boomed from the light itself, from all around me. Behold, Arthur Thorne, the weave of what is. She is at peace. She is complete. To extract her is to tear the fabric. To anchor her is to invite chaos. It was the core speaking now, its voice the rustle of a billion forgotten whispers, the sigh of aeons. It was not malevolent, not in a way I could comprehend. It was a force, a process, an ancient, alien form of consciousness striving for a cohesion I could only guess at. But I had Mitchell's journal and Katie's locket, the canticle of stilling. The words looked like jagged constellations on the vellum page. I didn't understand them, not with my conscious mind, but a deeper part of me, the part that was Daniel Mitchell's descendant, the part that resonated with Katie's stolen anchor, seemed to recognize their cadence, their power. I raised the locket, its silver glinting in the core's impossible light. "This belongs to her," I shouted, my voice a tiny, defiant pinprick in the face of that overwhelming presence. "This memory is hers!" And I began to chant. The words were guttural, melodic, alien. They clawed their way out of my throat, each syllable a physical effort, resonating with the locket, with the core, with the echo of Katie. The locket flared, a brilliant silver-blue light erupting from it, pushing back against the core's incandescence. The nivel fundamento convulsed. The swirling fragments of reality spun faster, shrieking, as if in pain or protest. The core pulsed erratically, its light flickering, dimming, then flaring with renewed intensity. The echo of Katie stirred, her translucent eyelids fluttering. A single, pure, tear-like drop of silver light detached itself from her form and drifted towards the locket in my hand, absorbing into it. The locket grew intensely hot, then cold. The echo of Katie opened her eyes. They were not vacant, not serene, but filled with a soft, knowing light. She smiled, a faint, ethereal smile, not of recognition, but of release. And then, with a sigh that seemed to echo through the very foundations of the Galleria, her form dissolved, not into nothingness, but into a cascade of shimmering motes that flowed into the locket, until it pulsed with a gentle, steady light of its own. The overwhelming pressure of the core receded, its light softening, its chaotic energies momentarily stilled. I had not destroyed it. I had not saved Katie in the way I dreamed, but I had changed something. I had anchored a piece of her, a true piece, outside its grasp. The silence that followed was profound, absolute, the silence of a held breath before an unknown future. The profound silence in the Nivel Fundamento was broken by a soft, almost hesitant, shuffling sound from the darkness behind me, from the direction of the access shaft I'd descended. I turned, still clutching the now gently pulsing locket, my body thrumming with the aftershocks of the canticle and the core's response. Figures were emerging from the gloom, not the spectrum. At their head was a woman with sharp, intelligent eyes and hair shot through with premature gray. She carried herself with an air of weary authority. Beside her, a man whose features bore a startling, though older, resemblance to the faded portraits of Daniel Mitchell in my grandmother's attic. He gave me a grim, appraising look. "Arthur Thorne, I presume," the woman said, her voice calm but carrying an undercurrent of urgency. "I am Sarah Grady, and this," she gestured to the man, "is Daniel Mitchell, your distant cousin, I believe. We are cartographers of faded places." Grady, Mitchell, the names from the journals, made flesh. "You took a considerable risk, Mr. Thorne," Daniel Mitchell stated, his voice a low rumble that seemed to echo the deeper tones of the now subdued core. "The canticle of stilling, it hasn't been successfully invoked in this nexus for over a century. We detected the resonance shift from our perimeter monitoring station. The protocol Silencio de Aether was initiated as a precautionary measure to dampen the wider fallout. Your actions, however reckless, seem to have focused the core's energies, anchored a significant portion of the Katie trace into that locket." He nodded towards my hand. It wasn't an accusation, more a statement of incredible fact. Sarah Grady stepped forward, her gaze softening as she looked at the locket. "My father, Thomas Grady, he tried to do something similar for me when I was a child and briefly misplaced by this place. He wasn't as fortunate. The core was more volatile then, less understood." A wave of understanding and a profound sorrow for Thomas washed over me. Ilara. Sarah Grady was Ilara. He hadn't been entirely consumed by the forgetting. He had been searching for his daughter, who had found her own way out, or been rescued, and now walked these shadowed paths herself. They explained, in clipped, professional tones, that nevertheless carried the weight of generations of esoteric knowledge, that my unauthorized intervention had paradoxically created a window of opportunity. The core, while not defeated, was in a state of temporary quiescence, its aggressive expansionist tendencies curbed by the re-anchoring of Katie's potent memory thread. The locket now acts as a localized stabilizer. Mestra Legia, a cartographer with eyes that seemed to see beyond the visible spectrum, explained later after they'd guided me from the Nivel Fundamento. It holds a true echo, a fragment of uncorrupted memory that the core, for now, respects, or is perhaps perplexed by. I was no longer a mere guardian, a pawn in the Galleria's game. I had become something else. The locket, now cool against my skin, felt like an extension of myself, a part of Katie that was undeniably, irrevocably with me. It wasn't the joyful reunion I had fantasized about in my darkest hours, but it was a presence, a quiet, constant reminder. The raw, gaping wound of her absence had not healed, but its edges no longer felt so jagged, so voracious. Something had been returned, or at least something essential had been preserved from utter dissolution. The cartographers weren't a government agency, not in any recognizable sense. They were an ancient, clandestine order, a lineage of scholars, mystics, and reluctant warriors dedicated to charting, understanding, and sometimes gently nudging the faded places of the world. A faded place like the Galleria Sombracosta, where reality frayed and the echoes of what was, or what could have been, held sway. They didn't seek to destroy these nexuses, for they understood that such places were an intrinsic, if dangerous, part of the universe's deeper fabric. Their goal was balance, containment, the preservation of what little sanity could be salvaged from the brink of unreality. My old life, the one before the Galleria, before the whispers and the rules, was gone, irretrievable. The knowledge I now possessed, the experiences seared into my soul, made any 3 months have passed. Or perhaps it's 6. Time flows differently now, measured not by clocks or calendars, but by the subtle shifts in the Galleria Sombracosta's oppressive atmosphere, by the cadence of its silent breathing. I still walk these shadowed halls, but I am no longer Arthur Thorne, the desperate, grieving brother, the unwitting janitor of a forgotten hell. I am a guardian consecrated, a novice initiate of the cartographers of faded places. My office is still the old security room, but now it's filled with Daniel Mitchell's charts, with Mestre Ligeia's arcane instruments for measuring memorial resonance, and with my own meticulously kept logs, a true continuation of my ancestors' work. The locket, Katie's locket, rests always against my skin, beneath my shirt. It pulses with a faint, steady warmth, a quiet counterpoint to the Galleria's cold, ambient dread. She is with me, not as the sister I lost, but as an anchor, a focus, a fragment of pure memory that holds a part of this place in check. The pain of her absence has not vanished, but it has transformed, alchemized into a profound, sorrowful purpose. The Galleria is quieter now, its more aggressive manifestations quelled, its hunger abated, though never truly sated. The customers are rarer, the whispers less insistent. The core in the Nivelle Fundamento still pulses, but its rhythm is more contemplative, stilled for now. My new manual is a far more complex document, filled not with prohibitions, but with methodologies, techniques for reading the Galleria's subtle cues, for reinforcing the anchors, for gently guiding the lost echoes that still wander its corridors. Mr. Robert Langley, the original custodian, was eventually retrieved by the cartographers, or rather, the fragmented, deeply traumatized echo of him was. He now resides in one of their secluded sanctuaries, undergoing a slow, painstaking process of reweaving, as Mestre Ligeia calls it. The interface that wore his skin has dissolved back into the Galleria's ambient consciousness, its purpose temporarily frustrated. Sarah Grady has become a mentor, her own experiences within faded places providing a grim but invaluable perspective. Daniel Mitchell, my kinsman, teaches me the old, forgotten lore of the cartographers, the delicate art of balancing on the precipice of unreality. We are a small, dedicated band, fighting a quiet, unseen war against the slow unraveling of the world, one faded place at a time. The Galleria Sombricasta is my charge, my responsibility. Its moods are my barometer, its stability my constant concern. I am its keeper, and in a strange, symbiotic way, it is mine. Sometimes, in the deepest hours of the night, when the silence of the mall is at its most profound, I can almost hear Katie's laughter, not a haunting echo, but a faint, pure note carried on the still air, emanating from the locket. It's a reminder of what was lost, but also of what was saved, what was anchored against the tide of forgetting. The cartographers warn that nexuses like the Galleria are never truly tamed. They sleep, they dream, and eventually they awaken, their hunger renewed. The canticle of stilling, the locket, they are temporary measures, a finger in a dike that, one day, inevitably burst. But until that day, I will walk these corridors. I will listen to the silence. I will read the patterns in the dust and the shadows. I will be the watcher in the quiet, the keeper of the forgotten, the line against the fade. For I understand now, you don't just get lost in the Galleria Sombricasta. You become a part of its endless, sorrowful story. And some stories, some memories, are too precious to be allowed to vanish completely, even if it means dedicating your own life to the dim, flickering candle of their remembrance, here in the heart of the fade. The work of a cartographer, the work of a guardian, is never truly done.